Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the podcast Strikes Back. My name is George and you're listening to our review of Detective Pikachu with the boys Kana.
Hello.
And Benny.
Hi there.
Well guys, in April of 2016, we got news that there was going to be a live action Detective Pikachu film, and I don't think any of us were excited for that one. But now we've seen the film, we've come out of the cinema, we sat in our studio. It's time to do our review. So let's get into the non-spoiler part of the review. But before we get into that, let's catch up on how we were all feeling getting in. Benny, as our resident Pokemon nerd, expert, aficionado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
whatever
second
word
one sounds
you
a
want
lot
to use.
better.
I've played a Pokemon.
How'd you feel going in, man?
Okay, so you really mentioned something important that I want to key into with this whole review, actually, just there, about when they first announced this film.
Yeah.
And how utterly bizarre it all felt. Like, it just seemed like an absolute joke. Early word was like, oh, they're eyeing like someone like The Rock or Ryan Reynolds.
I thought I was trying to remember if I was imagining that. Like, I was thinking about it today. Exactly what you were thinking about is like when we first heard this, it was bizarre. And I was like, was there a rock attached to this?
Yeah. And it just seemed like the most kind of wrong-headed direction to take something like this you've ever heard of. It felt like the first attempt anyone had ever made at making a video game film. And then we started seeing some trailers and stuff. And I think that initial trailer, that really took off. That was one of the highest viewed trailers of all time, remember?
Yeah, that broke a few records, didn't it?
It came out at the same day, I think, as Toy Story 3 and was viewed like twice as fast.
Or Toy Story 4.
Toy Story 4, yeah. My reaction to that trailer was very positive.
Yeah, I think we were all.
Based on where I was coming from and at it. So
sheer shock as well. Like, I mean, coming from thinking this is the most bizarre premise for a movie to then suddenly seeing that
was like hope.
Yeah, that was like a big movement on like kind of the needle, I suppose. Like that was like no hope to like, oh, this could actually be good.
And I think 90% of the goodwill was how hard they seem to have nailed just the Pikachu, the title character. I had other takeaways from it, but I think that alone was so impressive in its own way and so kind of shocking. It's like they've actually translated this, from this, not all that impressively animated cartoon series and video game series into real life in a way that was just equal parts like realistic and cartoony, and it had Ryan Reynolds' voice, which is another thing we can start doing. But I don't know. So just I don't think I was ever as impressed by the trailers leading up to this as that first one, but definitely positive vibes all the way through from there.
Yeah. How about you, Connor?
I think Ben pretty much summed it up. I was very much on the same page when we first heard the announcement. I remember laughing about it. I remember actually like in this studio talking about it, thinking like, what are they thinking? And then, the trailers come out. I didn't think I was going to like Ryan Reynolds in that role. But the humor kind of seemed to win me over. And I really liked the look of the Pokemon in general. I mean, full disclosure, I'm like the one 90s kid that seemed to have just bypassed Pokemon in general. It just wasn't a big thing in my household.
Not to derail, but finish your thoughts, Georgie. Can you give yours? And then can we just give exactly where we come from in regards to Pokemon?
Yeah. So, look, I came into this thinking that this was... I was surprisingly optimistic with this film. I think I went in thinking that... I like Ryan Reynolds. I like his kind of sense of humor. I liked the design of a lot of these creatures, and the execution on these creatures seemed really good as well. Got this really cool shot of is it Charizard, the fire-breathing one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've explained where you come from.
Yeah, that's it. I don't feel like I really need to explain more.
Dragon.
Like Charizard, is that the one? Yeah. So George, why don't you tell us where you're from in terms of?
I think the same sentiment reigns true for myself. I loved, I think something we haven't touched upon yet was the cinematography and the lighting. It looked like Blade Runner or something. It was the neons and the darkness. It just looked really fantastic. That first trailer I'm referencing, and the Pokemon design looked fantastic. It was sort of, Ryan Reynolds riding the coattails of the success of Deadpool 1. It sort of seemed to have all the ingredients in there to be something quite interesting. So I was pretty excited, and a couple reviews came out, and I saw some good word before we saw it. So I was interested. I was very interested. But in terms of Pokemon, my connection to that, I played pretty much the whole way through Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, and then Ruby Sapphire. And then that's where I kind of dropped off.
Yeah, that was definitely because we were all kind of the age with like we are just perfect for Pokemon.
Yeah.
I just read a little earlier today, which is I think one of the most apt, if a little insensitive, ways of describing the phenomenon is that it hit the world like an atomic bomb, but it had a very specific blast radius. Like you had to be in that blast, or else you're never going to be part of Pokemon. And I am one of those people. I was like 8 years old when it first came out, and just getting that first game, like that's one of my formative like cartoon and video game experiences growing up.
I remember just yearning for that game, man. I remember just like I remember thinking like I'm gonna be complete once I get that game.
So that's
which one were you, red or blue?
Blue.
Blue.
Last ways, but I've
red.
always been a grass guy. Venusaur all the way.
Hey.
But
See, this was my like experience as a kid, which is a bunch of people talking about bloody Pokemon and being like,
"Mother, please."
Being like, what the hell are they on about?
So yeah, it's I am definitely the target audience for this. I'm glad we have a little mix of kind of of people for this. And I'm also someone who's followed Pokemon throughout the years. One of my very best friends is a Pokemon fanatic, absolutely obsessed. It's his thing. You know, everyone has their thing.
He's got his niche.
Yeah. So he's kind of kept me a little bit more into it than I probably would have been. I'm kind of like I'll play every like second generation of games that comes out, and I won't finish them. But
he doesn't miss a single one, does he?
Oh, no, he's all over that shit.
Does he catch them all? Does he got 100% completion?
He catches them all, absolutely. Yeah, he's
that's
full,
terrifying.
Full into it. But yeah, that's that.
So we've got a bit of a lay of the land of how we were expecting going in. We've got a bit of history on our Pokemon status. Let's talk about the film itself. Let's go in some positives. I think maybe the first thing to talk about is the Pokemon design. That's clearly for me the biggest positive from this.
The design was really good, and we talked about this in the trailer that I think that they took some inspiration from, or at least it looks as though they took some inspiration from an artist that used to do kind of photorealistic versions of Pokemon.
Yeah, didn't he get a gig on this?
I think he was a consultant of some kind on the film. Arvalis, who I used to follow on DeviantArt back when DeviantArt was a thing. And yeah, he would just do like these kind of like viral, like super realistic, like very studied in actual anatomy and stuff. And they were mostly hideous. But just a really interesting take on what these creatures might be in a realistic setting. And yeah, this movie is kind of run with that theme, but like not all the way. It hasn't gone all the way with it because they're very clearly cartoons, which is kind of a bold choice in its own way because
well, I found there to be a mix, and this is one of the things that threw me a little bit, which is that both in design and execution, you have a pretty severe range in this movie. You have certain Pokemon that are designed and executed really well, and I think a prime example of that is Pikachu. Pikachu was, throughout the entire thing, there's obviously a lot of care and detail went into designing and executing and, doing really good CGI, and that it looked, more or less photorealistic. There were, I guess, scenes where, to me, it was painfully obvious that there was less attention given to the design and execution on other Pokemon. And that was really jarring for me. Like to see certain Pokemon, obviously look so good and others like look, visibly bad.
It's a good
bad
point,
might be a bit of an extreme, but
yeah, what I think it is, some of them just had a lot more work on integrating them into a realistic setting. When others look like they come straight out of like a Pokemon Stadium game, like the
like a
original
3D
design
kind of
in
game,
3D, like Homer in 3D.
Yeah. It looked like some of them were from like a PS4 game or like a some kind of console game.
But the one thing I really did appreciate it is that they didn't shy away from the grotesqueness of a lot of these creatures.
That tongue one.
Oh man,
the
tongue one. Yeah.
yeah. This is basically for the rest of the review. I'm going to be referring to
say their names. Sorry, I'm 8 years old again. Mom. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just look. I found that to be a pretty large range. And there were even some kind of I guess, majorly featured Pokemon in this that I thought could have done with a little bit more, I don't know, attention. It felt like the shading or the lighting or something that just didn't quite feel right. It felt like, just someone didn't have enough time or something to
Well,
really
that's
fully
where I'm
render
saying
them.
a lot of them look like cartoons
Yeah.
because they, like, even Pikachu, any of them, Pikachu's maybe the closest, but everything else, like, there's no moment you're going to confuse anything in this movie for being real. And I think that's largely true of effects in general, but especially in this. Like, I like that they really just went for it. They said, yeah, we're going to cover the screen in Pokemon as much as we can. It's not going to be convincing, but it's going to be, like, aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty cool because like there was some shots in here where like okay, there was one trailer beforehand where it was sort of like here's Eevee and here's Bulbasaur, and what I liked especially in an opening shot here was you were kind of wandering through the city and it wasn't like oh there's Machoke or they just kind of like were in the foreground in the background and it felt like integrated into the city, and I quite liked how they executed that.
Yeah. It didn't seem, and again, this is probably not for me to say because I don't have that same level of nostalgia for it, but it didn't seem as though they were leaning too much into, hey, it's this Pokemon now. Like, apart from a couple of scenes, which
100%. Because what surprised me about this film a little bit, actually, which was hinted at towards the later trailers, is it really wasn't as nostalgia focused as I expected. Because if you're doing a nostalgia focused Pokemon movie, you are not going to see anything out of the original 151 Pokemon. And this movie was covered in Pokemon that you've probably never seen before, Georgie.
Trico, there was some 3rd gen stuff.
Yeah,
there was a few 4th gen.
Yeah, there was some like really recent stuff as well. With like I couldn't pick the names of maybe like I don't know 20% of the Pokemon in this movie, and like
I was really
don't know
interested
Pokemon.
I forgot to ask you once we left the cinema, but I was really interested to see whether they were going to go beyond that original 150. Like I figured if they wanted to capture the audience that I thought that this was geared towards, that they would have stuck with the original 150 because that's probably what everyone knows, like Pikachu and all that kind of stuff.
But I think they were in that main 350. I think I think that was the meat and potatoes of it. Maybe 10%, 5%.
I mean, you would be the one to say because you only would know that more specifically.
There was those little hovery ones, and there was only a few that I didn't recognize or know the name of.
But more than I expected is definitely my takeaway.
Yeah, going off the nostalgia thing, I would have liked to see more nostalgia. Like I was sort of actually longing for a bit more. I wanted a few more theme songs or a few little references, maybe even like a red and a blue. I don't know, like you didn't want to be knocked over the head with fan service, but it would have been nice to have a few more of those things because it really didn't lean into those red and blue or those GBA games.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a video game adaptation of a video game that none of us have ever played. Most Pokemon fans probably haven't. Detective Pikachu, some people probably don't even know that is an actual specific video game. It's like a Professor Layton-y kind of puzzle game with a big narrative attached to it that apparently is quite, or shares a lot in common with this film. But I was quite impressed by the fact that there wasn't a huge amount of like catching Pokemon or like battling Pokemon. It wasn't like the stuff on the show. Like it felt like they were really happy to discard the stuff that most people would come in expecting. Most people coming in from our end of it.
Yeah, and we want to be careful because I think we're kind of teetering on the knife's edge of a spoiler in terms of what's in and what isn't in this film. But I totally agree. Like it doesn't feel fan servicey. It doesn't feel as, and for someone that isn't cued into that, there weren't really moments where I was like, I really don't understand what's going on. Like, what's significant about this, or why did they, hold the shot for an extra 5 seconds on that particular Pokemon while everyone laughs, type thing, which you find in a lot of these kinds of films.
Totally.
So yeah, I thought they did that really well, and whether that was like a marketing decision so they could get it out to as many people as possible, or whether this was just because I don't know, some kind of integrity thing.
Yeah. I think another strong point of this is the cinematography and the visual style. I think that especially the nighttime shots in Ryan City look absolutely phenomenal. One shot looks like something out of Blade Runner 2049.
It does, doesn't it? Like you use colors really well, yeah.
Very impressed with that.
Yeah, really, really aiming for that noir aesthetic. The cinematographer is the guy who did Gladiator.
Nice.
Really?
And he shot this film on film, 35mm. Which
you can kind of see.
Yeah. And that's something that works so well with a movie with this kind of dynamic range and color and the blacks and stuff. That's just a really interesting and unexpected choice for a film like this, and I think it really shows in in the scenes that aren't, just full on CGI clusterfucks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So I think those two for me were the main standout things with Detective Pikachu. What other positives did you guys see in there?
Well, I would like to say, sorry, just to jump in, I think a combination of those two things would be our word of the decade, world building, which I think
We do love that word.
The way they do integrate those designs and shoot everything, it really. I don't want to be repeating myself here, but it didn't feel too pandering or anything. It was just revealing this world very naturally to you. There were instances of a lot of exposition and stuff happening, but that was all more story based, which I feel like is where most of the complaints about this film are going to come. But
I thought that the intro, like the first 20 minutes, was a thing of beauty in terms of really showing the world and how Pokemon interact in that world.
Yeah, just little reveals one after the other showing this is a world, it's like our world, it is not our world. There's all of these differences, and it felt very natural for a franchise that is utterly bizarre to anyone uninitiated.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, as I said, just the integration, it felt very natural and it felt well realized. Did you guys like Ryan Reynolds as Pikachu?
I did. I think I'm kind of a sucker for that. His style of humor, it's very kind of sarcastic and offbeat type of humor. And so it was just Ryan Reynolds playing Ryan Reynolds as a Pikachu. So I was kind of sold on that.
Business as usual for him.
And I thought he played off, and I can't remember the kid's name.
Justice Smith.
Justice Smith.
I thought he played off him really well. Do you reckon that's his real name? Justice
Absolutely.
Smith?
Yeah.
Because that would have to be one of the most bold names to then give yourself.
Justice.
Yeah,
Justice,
if you're
get
looking
to
to
your room.
I need an actor name. So it's like you should call yourself Justice. I'd be like,
You're
yeah,
gonna be
that seems like a
President
good idea.
Justice.
Sister Harmony.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that their interplay together was really good.
Yeah, I liked Ryan Reynolds as well. Not who I would have cast as a Pikachu in a million years, but I have no idea who I would have cast as a Pikachu.
Yeah.
I know there's a long-running meme of how Danny DeVito should play him in the movie, and I think that would be amazing,
That would be
especially if it's just Danny
hilarious.
DeVito in a onesie. But he was definitely in the vein of every other Ryan Reynolds character he's ever played before. I thought there was some kind of softness to him that you don't often see in his character.
Yes.
Deadpool's obviously a fucking hard edge of a guy. And I thought that came across really well.
Yeah, it wasn't just joke. Like he definitely had the lion's share of comedic moments in this, but there were those other sort of softer beats in there that worked well.
Yeah, and I thought he was, I don't know, his humor felt a little more natural than just like one-liners or something. It felt like that was like a coping mechanism or something. Like that was just him talking and it was kind of naturally funny. As for Justice Smith, I really liked him in this movie.
Yeah.
Someone who I thought was kind of a non-presence in Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom.
I can barely remember him in that movie.
Yeah, you were asking me on the way over here who he played in that movie, and I was trying to explain. I was describing every scene he was in. I was like,
I can't. I've erased it from my mind.
yeah.
I remember flashes of that movie, and none of them are good. Millions. That's pretty much it.
millions.
Yeah, but I thought he was a really strong lead in this film, and he does have to carry a pretty significant part of the film on his own, because I mean it's a while before Pikachu even shows up, and I was already pretty engaged in
Oh,
his
right off
character
the
as
bat,
well.
I mean, I was hooked on that character. I thought that he did a really good job of conveying that, and he shows quite a bit of emotional range in this. To be honest, and it's not something I would have expected from this kind of film. Whether it works in a story sense, is another matter. But his selling of those emotions was really, I think, were really solid.
And did you guys know Bill Nye was in this? Because I only heard this a couple weeks ago.
Stop it. Where?
I was.
He turned up in the movie, and I was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah,
Bill
I don't
Nye's
think
in
he
this?
was reported at all.
Oh shit!
You
I'm
thinking
so
of the science
sorry.
guy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't want to throw you under the bus there.
And really, it was as soon as I said where, and it kind of clicked in my mind, and
Bill
the rest
Nye,
of
the
the rest of the
science
time
guy.
before I said, before I admitted it,
Do
was
I
just
own
me figuring out whether I should own up to that mistake.
How's that
Like, I
going
could
to
just
appear
pass it
if
off.
I never
like,
say anything?
Yeah. I was literally thinking I could just pass it off as a joke. It'd be fine.
Yeah, but I had heard he was in this, but I think a lot of people wouldn't know. And man, he's
We
always
appreciate
just
your
such a-
honesty, man.
Yeah, thank you. I don't.
always so happy to see him in anything. Like I don't care how long he's in it, what he's playing. I'm just like every time he's on screen, I'm just like, yes.
Yeah,
He's
me
one
too.
of those actors really that has enormous amounts of goodwill from almost everyone,
Yeah.
and I have no idea why.
My wife Ash,
Oh, sick reference.
she met him and she said, obviously he's going to be nice to everyone, but there are a lot of the people come through the cinema that she works at, and she said he was so incredibly friendly and gave everyone time and thanked everyone in a very one-on-one manner that a lot of other guests and celebrities and people coming to do Q&As just kind of in, out, see you later.
Not even that, Georgie. I was there that day. So much more than any regular patron. Like he actually looked like he was talking to you and engaging with you, which was utterly amazing. So maybe I'm a bit biased on this guy.
I mean, I think that is
so
more
charming.
spectacular than people realize, because can you imagine being that famous? Everyone is always coming up to you. Like, I mean, it is not unreasonable for people to be like, look, please fuck off.
Yeah,
I'm
having
like,
dinner.
Yeah.
Leave me the fuck alone.
I think he has a massive advantage on only having become famous at like 60 years of age.
Yeah.
And so there was, I think he was a little at points in this movie like an old man in a franchise he knows nothing about, saying words that mean nothing to him.
It felt like that.
Oh,
didn't it?
totally.
But there was still a charm to him that I find
I thought he was
irresistible.
underutilized. I was actually a little bit. I was happy when he turned up. I was like, "This is so cool." Bill Nye, he's in a Pokemon movie. What the fuck? You told me that 5 years ago, I would have said you're laughing. But I just thought he was a little bit underutilized, and there was a couple things we'll get into spoilers later that I didn't quite agree with, but less so his performance and maybe more scripting.
Speaking of underutilized, Ken Watanabe shows up for a bit in this movie as well. He was in the trailers. Sounds like he's got the sorest throat in the world.
Bro, he had about 10 lines in this.
Yes. I really did like him, though.
Yes.
More so than in most of these Hollywood movies that I think just do absolutely nothing with him. He just becomes a meme when he says "let them fight."
Yeah.
But I don't know. He had, because no spoilers. He was just a friend of the main character's father.
Yeah.
And I don't know. He just really sold some of the heavy lifting that the rest of the movie was trying to do for me. It was a very small role, and I don't know why he stood out so much to me.
It's is again one of those actors that seems to just have goodwill from the public. Like you never hear anyone like really raging against him. Be weird if they were.
I think we've talked positive. Are there any other positives? Because I think there's a few negatives I'd like to touch upon.
I mean, I did. I'm just trying to think. I was going to say I did talk about a little bit of negatives, which we might want to get into, unless you have a positive.
Yeah, I think this movie really captured the spirit of the kind of detective noir genre much more than I expected it to, and in certain ways that we'll get into later. But I don't know. It was just the look of it, the feel of it, the story beats. I'm like, this is really, you don't see many of these too much nowadays, and it just kind of took me back to, I don't know, other things that I've watched, and like Who Framed Roger Rabbit is obviously a very clear comparison, but yeah, I don't know. I just think that was more than I was expecting in that department.
It's funny because we were I was thinking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit the other day, because we had a conversation about how having a cartoon world, and having a cartoon come into the real world is a bad recipe. And I was trying to figure out if where that movie fell in terms of whether it's kind of more like the Smurfs or Alvin and the Chipmunks, or whether it's more like Detective Pikachu. And I kind of landed on the fact that it's far more like Detective Pikachu, because all the characters in that world know that cartoons exist. They interact with them regularly. And the more I see it, I think that's the more the way that if you want to bring cartoons into the real world, that's how you have to do it. You can't just have them appear in our normal world. You have to have them integrated and living in the world. And I'm really, really appreciative that this movie took that tack. I mean, if we're going to talk about positives, I think the way that they like the overall design of this movie, or the world that it takes place in, some key decisions obviously made early on. Love that. I love that they said we're going to go for a world that has Pokemon. Yep. And that might have alienated a fair few potential people that might have seen this movie, because I can imagine for a lot of people that might be affronting. Like, I'm not going to understand anything about a Pokemon world. But I think that overall it makes for a far more convincing narrative, and a far more kind of pleasing movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like they could have done that Sonic the Hedgehog, the Smurfs thing And it was very, very great, really good decision making not to go down that path. And I hope that more studios follow suit here and use this as a bit of a case study to say, hey, we don't have to bring them into New York and they're going crazy down, 21st Street or something. We can build a whole new world, and hopefully it's a step in the right direction in these kind of films. Any more positives? Because I think the one thing that I was, what you said, Connor, before is like that first 20 minutes, I was like, you got me. Like, this is fantastic. You've laid this out perfectly. I'm getting where the kid's going. I'm getting where Pikachu, how it's all involved and where we're heading. And then I felt like the film sort of went on this quite relentless pace. And I wanted to sort of some parts to kind of slow down. And I thought the pacing of the film was sometimes just too fast. And I wanted to get to know the characters more. I wanted to explore the cities more. I wanted to know the motives of certain people. And it felt like everything was skimmed over a bit too fast. And at 104 minutes, I think they could have pushed this another 10 minutes and just expanded out a few scenes to give it more emotional resonance and emotional impact.
I would definitely agree. I think all the positive things that I have to say about this film occur within the first half of the film. I felt like there was a massive dip around halfway, and which is kind of a really disappointing thing to come into a movie with high expectations or surprisingly high expectations, and then have the first half really deliver on those, and then to have it kind of not stick the landing is it leaves a very sour taste in your mouth. And that's kind of what happened with this film for me. Like, it just, there's some things that happened in that second half that I thought you were like, you had it. Because all the cool, like the film noir aspect, completely gone in the second half. I felt like they didn't even touch on that anymore. It felt like a completely different movie. I even felt like the CGI work in the second half was worse.
I agree.
And that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you focus on like the big climaxes for CGI, and I felt like the end, last 20 minutes was filled with really shoddy CGI.
I think they reached a point where they were just reaching beyond their means.
It felt like that.
Yeah, like I think my ideal version of this movie, because I love a lot of elements of it. I think it would be like, I don't know, like 2 hours long and with just a different third act.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, I feel like all the complaints that we're going to have about this are going to be in spoilers. But it definitely it's annoying because it started out, and I feel like my expectations are always fairly measured, but it really was exceeding them, and I'm just like, man, I felt like a Pokemon fan again. I'm like, fuck, I'm so excited to see a live action Pokemon movie right now, which I had not felt until after the movie had started, really. And then it just kind of it never completely lost me, but it was certainly like, this has gone from a like kind of a revelation to being like, oh yeah, this is good.
I had a lot of goodwill from the beginning.
Exactly.
That I was willing to kind of see it through.
Yeah.
But I didn't really feel like, I felt like everything that was happening on the second half was really being propelled by my goodwill from the first half. And retrospectively, it kind of diminishes the first half because you kind of get this overall kind of sense of the film.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. I think that front half was so strong, and it was almost like, it was sort of that feeling where you're like, it's sort of starting to dip, and you're like, okay, this is just a little bit of the film, and then it keeps dipping, and you're like, oh fuck, okay, is the third act going to pick up? And then by the end of the film, I was kind of like, damn, like that was such a strong start. It's kind of like the 4-man relay race, and the first two were great, and they dropped it.
Last guy sucks. I don't think this was the case for this film, but it really feels to me like something that was I don't know, heavily rewritten or had studio
100%.
I
don't know how else the second half would be so markedly different from the first. Like, that doesn't make sense to me unless someone went in with like a hatchet and just carved up that second half.
Yeah, I don't know. I think revisiting the film, it's maybe not going to feel as dramatic.
Once you know those beats, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's more of just a kind of slight quality shift than like a huge tonal shift or anything. But yeah, it does have the feel. The kind of movies that it really reminded me of, and I say this with love for these movies, is Power Rangers, the recent reboot, and
that's not fair.
The most recent Ninja Turtles reboot, not the sequel. But just two movies I feel like really had a lot of heart to them and did a lot of work setting up the characters, and then kind of exploded into these other CGI things that just don't really stick the landing. But like you said, Gunnar, just bring so much goodwill with them that I have a lot of affection for them.
I felt like the second half felt more like a kid's film, like a distinctly kids film. Like the first half felt like something that kids would enjoy, but adults would also enjoy. And I thought that that's kind of how it was initially marketed. Because like, from the trailers, I was like, oh, this has got enough humor and enough intrigue that this is pretty much for anyone. But by the second half, I was like, this second half is very much designed
kids
for
adventure film.
It was kind of edgy in parts. Like it didn't feel like something that would come out of a Disney or something,
Not typically, no. And there was, I mean, the most cringy, one of the most cringy parts of that second half there, and you mentioned this, Ben, is that there are moments of CGI clusterfuck, which is the technical term we use for pretty much every third act in the DCEU. It's that there was a good 5-minute segment. It felt like 20 minutes.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
You don't need that kind of thing in something that had really positioned itself as a much smaller story.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that to me really kind of felt like where this movie lost me.
Yeah.
Like that, from there on, I didn't quite get the same beats and I didn't quite get the same excitement.
I'm on exactly the same page as you.
Yeah.
So torn because that whole segment deals with one of my favorite Pokemon.
Yeah.
Well, did you feel like it had been done justice as one of your favorite Pokemon?
We can talk about this later.
Yeah.
Any other negatives? Or should we get into a bit of a wrap up and spoilers?
Yeah, let's jump into spoilers. I think that's probably the best thing.
Yeah, I think as a wrap up for me, I definitely do recommend Detective Pikachu. I mean, if we're sort of considering where I was at when this first got announced, I think this is a pretty solid outcome, and the realization of the Pokemon, the world building, it really does feel fantastic. And I think this could be a good basis to build a second, third, fourth franchise, build the sequels and the franchise up. But just the execution of the back half really bummed me out. And I thought it went from a really fantastic film to, it sort of felt a bit flaccid towards the end. So slightly disappointed, but also simultaneously fairly impressed with certain components.
It's a weird feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I'm really glad that you guys are on the same page, because I didn't want to be coming in as this just kind of like someone that hadn't grown up with Pokemon and just being this negative Nelly being like, oh, Pokemon are stupid.
Didn't get it
or anything like that.
He didn't get it.
I was so worried that both of you were going to be like, there's some kind of nostalgia thing that I'd missed.
It was the best thing ever made. What are you talking
about?
about?
Like, oh God, I'm going to have to do this now. I'm going to have to be that guy.
Yeah, so I do recommend this, but there's a few caveats in there.
Yeah, this is something I'd probably recommend for like an afternoon with Netflix.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like that kind of movie.
Yeah, I find Pokemon so interesting because for something that was such a huge phenomenon, it strikes me as very binary. Like you're into it or you're not, you get it or you don't. So I wouldn't really go out of my way to recommend this to anyone who's not already in the bag. This is not going to change your mind about Pokemon. If you're into it though, give it a go, because I think there is enough kind of just stuff there, superficial stuff to please the kid in you that still loves that thing. And there's some really cool Easter eggs in there that I enjoyed a lot. I think they made some good choices in terms of just which Pokemon to include and how to include them. Mm-hmm. But then I think there's also a lot of heart to it, and not a knockout, but just a pretty decent movie underneath that as well.
Yeah. Do you want to give a little?
I think I kind of gave the wrap up in there, and so I'm just really glad that you guys are on the same page, which is that like really solid start, drop off on the second half, like pretty major drop off on the second half, and it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. But overall, I would say that it is something that if it comes up on Netflix, that's probably when I would go to see it. I think that the first 20 minutes is cool seeing in the cinema.
Yep.
I don't think the cinema does any favors for it after that.
Yeah, and just finally, I wouldn't necessarily want to see a sequel to this. I would love to see this spin off into its own universe. Not on the scale of the MCU or something, but I would love to watch more movies in this world.
Yeah, me too. 100%.